Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon or morning, as the case may be, with us today. My name is Amy Herrera. I'm a special agent at the FBI's Washington, D.C. field office. And before we get into the meat of today's webinar, I have just a few quick administrative reminders for everyone. First off, yes, we are recording today, and yes, you will be able to find a recording of today's session in the same website as the recordings from our prior two sessions. You'll get an email link to that in an email message that you'll receive tomorrow. I'll also throw it in the chat box as we go. So yes, you'll be able to access the recording along with some associated handouts as we go. Speaking of handouts, there are a couple of handouts that we have loaded for you today. You're welcome to take those with you, share them, print them, hand them out. The more you raise awareness with us, the better, we think. Those handouts will also be on that website, so you can find the handouts there as well. If you are a member of the media, we're glad you're here. If you want to write about what you're hearing today, please just reach out through the chat box or the question box, and we'll connect you with the appropriate public affairs person who can help you in that work. If you are attending today looking for continuing education credits, we do not issue ourselves any CEUs, but you can use a certificate that you'll get tomorrow and submit that to whatever group typically issues your CEUs. Feel free to go ahead and do that. Questions. We have built the conversation today around the questions that you submitted when you registered. So you'll recognize a lot of the questions that our experts have to talk about today. You are also welcome anytime to type questions that are on your mind into that question box. If we have time, we'll get to some of those. We have a whole lot of great stuff to cover today. Lastly, a big thank you to the co-sponsors who are helping to get the word out and helping with the content of this entire series for the month of May. And those co-sponsors include the ABA Foundation, the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, AARP, and the National Capital Region chapter of InfraGard. So thanks to all of those awesome people and places for bringing today and our prior two sessions together. That concludes the administrative announcements. Yay! So I am very happy to turn the virtual microphone over to my friend Sam Quinones from the ABA Foundation. Sam, over to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Amy. And as Amy mentioned, I'm Sam Quinones. I'm the Senior Director of Bank Community Engagement at the ABA Foundation. For those of you who may not know, that's the 501c3 nonprofit arm of the American Bankers Association. At both the ABA, that is the American Bankers Association, and the ABA Foundation, protecting older adults is a chief priority of ours. And I'm here today as part of a national campaign that we actually sponsor, known as Safe Banking for Seniors, which we first launched in 2016 to help educate elders and their families all about safeguarding their financial assets and identities. I'll be your moderator during this third virtual session of the series. And if you didn't get a chance to participate, as Amy mentioned in our two prior meetings, I really recommend watching the recordings to access some great information. In our first session, Special Agent Jamie Daly reviewed an in-depth case study of a scam perpetrated by Keisha Williams and the egregious way she manipulated people and scammed them out of millions of dollars. Last week, Special Agent Wayne Jacobs, Emma Fletcher, Rachel Yurkovich, and Supervisory Special Agent Patrick Wyman talked about prevalent scams against elders and highlighted key trend data from both the FBI's IC3 and the FTC. And today we'll be focusing on understanding why elders are vulnerable, discuss some of the strategies criminals use to scam people out of their hard-earned money, and of course, ways to combat these attempts. And we've got a phenomenal panel of experts from the AARP Fraud Watch Network, the Cybercrime Support Network, and the FINRA Investor Education Foundation that will be sharing all about it over the next 55 minutes or so together. So let's get started with a couple of introductions. Christine, could you share a little bit about yourself and your role at the FINRA Foundation?
Thanks, Sam. It's wonderful to be here today. As he mentioned, I'm Christine Kiefer. I'm a Senior Director with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. FINRA, for anyone unaware, is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and FINRA regulates all stockbrokers and brokerage firms in the country under the oversight of the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're not part of the federal government, but we are an authorized regulator, and it's our job to help Americans safeguard their finances with investor protection and market integrity. And the FINRA Foundation focuses on those issues for retail consumers, helping them understand how to save, invest, and protect their assets.
Thanks, Christine. Kathy, how about you next?
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy Stokes, and I'm the Director of Fraud Prevention Programs for AARP. We have a program we call the AARP Fraud Watch Network, where we engage with people all around the country in person when we can, soon to be again, I hope, but also virtually to get out the message of the red flags of scams and fraud, especially so that older adults can protect the money that they've saved so long to be able to support themselves in retirement. We have a great website at aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork. Great information. Share it with friends and family. Get knowledgeable about the scams that are out there, so you can prevent your friends and your family and yourself from engaging.
Thanks so much, Kathy. And last but certainly not least, Kim.
Thank you. I'm Kim Cassie. I'm with the Cybercrime Support Network. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We help people who have experienced cybercrime or scam. We help them by identifying the cybercrime or scam, education to help prevent cybercrimes and scams, and also how to report and resources for recovery. And in my position at CSN, I am the director of our peer support program, which assists survivors of romance scams.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. It's all great to have you here today. So thinking about getting us started, Christine, you've got the first question. Are older adults uniquely vulnerable to scams?
Well, that is often the million-dollar question. And I believe that many believe that older adults are uniquely vulnerable. And in fact, the evidence is really mixed. It's not about age specifically. And if there's one thing that you take away from this webinar, and in addition to all the wonderful resources we're going to talk about, it's to remember that we all have our vulnerability points. Even us as fraud fighting professionals, we all have vulnerability points. And the scammers are looking to take assets from any individual that they can. Sometimes age can be a factor, but the research suggests that it's more about repeat targeting than it is about age itself. And so seniors and older adults are more frequently targeted by certain types of scams, in part because they have access to funds, and that's really what the scammer's looking for. There can be other vulnerability points for older adults. For instance, maybe there's some cognitive decline, or perhaps there's an unfamiliarity with certain technology. But that's less about age and more about the scammers using their targeting techniques to identify who has assets and who they can take them from.
Thanks, Christine. Kathy, anything to add?
I agree with Christine wholeheartedly. If you look at data from the federal government, it's actually younger people that report experiencing scams and losing money to them more than older adults. The key differentiator is that older adults, when they're targeted and victimized, they lose so much more money. As Christine said, they have the assets they've been saving for retirement. They've got the Social Security check. Maybe they have housing wealth. And they lose these assets at a time when they're least capable of recovering. And understand, when someone loses money to fraud, quite often that money is not recoverable.
Yeah. Well, bearing all of this in mind, I think, Christine, you sort of highlighted a key potential issue also with cognition and cognitive decline potential issues. What about any of those aspects? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We've been engaging in research recently with Rush University Medical Center to identify whether there are vulnerability points and what those are specifically for older adults. And some of the research points to isolation. And I know a lot of us probably already think of that, but I want you to think about isolation, not just in terms of a physical isolation, someone that is maybe alone at their house, but maybe they have someone in the home, whether it's a caregiver, family member, spouse, partner, but it's not someone that they specifically make financial decisions with. And so there can be physical isolation and also perceived isolation, someone that they don't feel that they have anyone to talk to. So those can be particularly strong vulnerability points. And you mentioned the cognitive decline, which we brought up just briefly before. Some of the research with Rush, we're finding that certainly when someone has in cognitive impairment, there are different protective measures that we need to put into place. But financial decision making is often some of the very first skills to diminish as we age. And what we're finding with Rush is that it's the rate of change that is the strongest predictor of scam vulnerability. So what I mean is we all have different levels of financial acuity, but when it changes more rapidly, there's a heightened risk of scam susceptibility. So we need to pay attention to that rate of change for individuals and less about what that absolute point is.
Kim, bearing in mind what Christine just mentioned about isolation, I know that scammers use a lot of different types of techniques. How do they prey on older adults? What type of strategies or techniques do they usually utilize, and what do you see at the Cybercrime Support Network?
Sure. So some of the things that I see during our romance scam peer support program that we run, a lot of the people who come to take part in our program will say that they met someone online, that they started either going on Facebook or another social media platform. Perhaps they were on Instagram, perhaps they were on a dating site during the pandemic trying to connect with others. And so scammers came pretending to be their age, pretending to like some of the things that they noticed that they liked on social media. So they found out that either the person perhaps had a dog or cat, or maybe had strong religious beliefs, or was reminiscing about something from the past that they both remembered. And so they use that information that they located about the person on that social media site or their dating site, where they maybe put out just a little bit too much about themselves, and then use that to get that foot in the door to become familiar with the person.
Thanks so much, Kim. Kathy, I got a question for you bearing that in mind. So it sounds like there's a lot of ways in which scammers can learn information on the web through what's being posted on social media. Are there other avenues that scammers use? Do they just, are they targeting everyone just in special circumstances, identifying what they already do or what they're already posting? Are they just targeting everybody and seeing what lands? What's going on here?
Well, these days, much of the consumer fraud that's happening out there is organized crime. And a lot of the data that are collected to target people is on the dark web for sale. Mm. So it could be that the organization that has you in its eyesight has bought a full panoply of information about you: your name, your date of birth, your social security number, your address. It has pulled information from your social media feeds, like you like dogs and gardening. So all of that stuff is now monetized and bought and sold among criminals. There are other ways, of course. An old school tactic is going through obituaries and getting a lot of information about the families that are mourning and are posting about that. It can be data breaches. It can be someone going through your mail. That still happens. So it comes from just about every corner these days.
So, okay, let's say someone gets involved, is victimized by a lottery scam or something along those lines, right? And a scammer targeted, got the money. Is that it? Is that the end of it? Or do you find that they continue to target or utilize kind of multi-pronged strategies in going after the same individual? Kim, could you talk about some of that?
Absolutely. I know with the participants in our program, what we see pretty regularly is they've lost this large sum of money to a romance scam. So now they are looking to get that money back. And so their information is sold, like Kathy said. Either the same scammer is using it and disguising themselves as someone else, or they've sold that information to other scammers. And so now they know this person has lost this money in a romance scam. So here are some things that they're going to be really worried about. How do I get my money back? By trying to go to some sort of asset recovery company that's fake. How do I get, better attention and get this investigated, fake investigators, fake law enforcement sites. They might also be nervous that the scammer had access to their computer, and now they get a tech call saying, you know, your computer's been compromised, your accounts have been compromised, your credit card has been stolen. And so their immediate reaction is to say, oh yes, of course, that must have happened because I was scammed. And so then they fall for another scam or another one. And so it's very easy when someone is in that vulnerable position to get them to believe that their computer's been hacked.
Christine, anything you want to add to that?
No, Kim really covered it well. I will say that we certainly see the recovery room operations, and sometimes someone may not even know they've been victimized yet, and they'll get a follow-up call immediately that says, oh, I'm an special investigator, and the person you were just talking to is under watch by us. We're here to protect you. And they don't even know at that moment they've already been victimized and they're already being hit by a recovery scam. So it really comes in many ways, as we sort of started with. The scammers are looking for any way to take the money, and they will use all avenues.
So Kathy, what's the implications of all of this for our older adults? You know, when this happens, what's going on? What are they experiencing? What's happening for them?
The criminal enterprises out there, from the individual guy in his mom's basement from a decade ago to transnational criminal operations, they know that if they can get the target into a heightened emotional state, it's what they call getting somebody under the ether, then they know that that person is hugely vulnerable to them. Because when you're in that heightened emotional state, maybe it's excitement because you just won the lottery in a car, or you know, it's love because now you've just fallen in love with somebody and you've committed your life to them online, or fear, you know, your grandson has been in a terrible accident and he needs money right away. When we're there, we can't very easily access our logical thinking processes. And so criminals know that. And as long as they can quickly get you into that state, they have you. And it's so hard to get out of it. And it's not just a one and done. These things go on, and they keep that person in that state, and they seek to keep that person away from talking to other people, manipulating them to say, you know, don't tell anybody, this is just between you and me. And that's how they continue these sort of long cons.
And we know that
Sam, do you
Sure.
mind if I add something? You know, Kathy pointed out a couple of different types of scams, and we've been working with a professor at University of Minnesota who really boils down to there's sort of fear-based scams and there's opportunity-based scams. Most things fall into one of two buckets, and they prey on different biases and attitudes that we hold. Some person might be uniquely vulnerable to a fear-based scam. Maybe there's someone who believes strongly in the power of authority, and the IRS or the Social Security scam, or one that preys on sort of fear of government or fear of, you know, not following the rules. That person might be uniquely vulnerable to that type of scam, whereas someone else who may believe, you know, that they're just waiting for that lucky break to finally have their financial security, and then all of a sudden they're presented with you know, that they have this long lost relative in Canada who's passed away and they were a beneficiary. That's an opportunity-based scam. They're going to be more vulnerable to that if they have that financial insecurity piece. So it really, you know, we all have those vulnerability points, and we use what we call our mental frames, but what our biases are and our experiences, those guide our choices. And when we're in those heightened emotional states that Kathy was talking about, it's really hard to make logical, rational decisions. So our body, you know, falls back to what our initial gut and emotional reactions will be, which tends to be driven by our biases at that point. So we're making these emotionally charged decisions when we're in those heightened emotional states, and we're not even able to kind of connect with that rational mind.
So Christine, bearing that in mind, what if this is such an emotional aspect to it, and obviously the financial losses here, what are the consequences for the elder after they've experienced this?
It can be tremendous. In some research we did many years ago, we found that 2/3 of the victims of scams that we had communicated with, 2/3 reported experiencing very severe social emotional consequences, PTSD, depression. We know that suicide happens as a result of someone being victimized by a scam. So there are some very severe consequences. Sometimes for many people, it goes on for decades because maybe they saved for a lifetime, they lost it in an instant, and now they don't have access to the funds they needed to finance their retirement, and maybe they live along or to pay for health care. And so there is not only an very long-term social and emotional reminders of the loss of those funds.
Right, excellent points. It's incredibly disheartening just to see about everything that's happening because it's on every potential level of an individual's life, whether it's their home, their family situation, their finances, access to food, a whole host of different areas. You know, thinking about this though, when scams happen, oftentimes it is obviously impacting the direct individual, but what about relatives or friends or family? Kathy, is there any impact on the larger network that the elder is involved in if the elder has a network?
Oh, by all means. We have what we call our Fraud Watch Network helpline, and we get calls for people that are just reporting scams that they saw but didn't engage in, and people that call because they're not sure whether or not that mailing from Publishers Clearinghouse is legit, or they call because they or someone they love is experiencing fraud and they need help. And so often the people that call are family members, and the family members in these situations are dealing with a mom or a dad or another loved one who's engaged in sort of a long running scam, and they can't get them to believe that it's not real. And from the vantage point of the family members who are angry or frustrated or scared or worried, they just can't understand why they can't get through to that person. They don't understand how sophisticated the crime is and how well prepared these scam organizations are for every inevitability to keep that person under that ether. And quite often, family ties end up just being torn apart because they can never see eye to eye, and the parent who's engaged or the grandparent who's engaged refuses to believe and then gets angry because their family is trying to take their excitement and love or whatever away from them, and it can destroy families.
Kim, what about situations where people are just targeted and they don't lose any money? I think Kathy can reference this earlier that FTC data show that older adults are nearly 50% more likely to file no loss reports than younger demographics, particularly those who are between 20 and 59 years of age. So we're obviously talking about scenarios where older adults are targeted and they're victimized and they send the money, but is there any sort of impact if there's no financial loss experienced?
There's still a great emotional impact. You're talking about, oftentimes people who are communicating with scammers multiple times a day for long periods of time. These people have become their friends. They are talking to them more than probably their family members or their own friends, and they're keeping it quiet because the scammer wants them to not talk to anyone else. They want to isolate them. So that emotional fallout, that ultimate betrayal in the end when you find out that the person isn't who they said they were, is still very traumatic. And it's not something, emotions aren't something that you turn on and off with a light, like a light switch, right? So everything takes time, and so that emotional fallout, I would say, is equally, if not more, difficult than the financial loss.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we all acknowledge that this is absolutely horrible and we've got to do something here. So Kathy, what are some things that seniors can do to protect themselves?
Well, I think what we can do to protect everybody in our sphere, older adult or not, is to engage in conversation with each other about this stuff. Christine's group, FINRA Foundation, had done some research that really shows education matters. So if you know about a specific scam, you're far less likely to engage with it or to lose money or sensitive information. And how do you learn about it? Well, you pay attention, you perk up when you hear something on your local news, or you read about something, and you just don't just keep it to yourself. Have a conversation with the people that you're close to. Hey, I just heard about the scam where someone calls and pretends they're Microsoft and there's a problem with their computer. What do you think about that? Like, just constantly having that conversation, signing up for alerts when you can. AARP has a program where you can sign up for watchdog alerts every other week, and it just keeps you sort of in the know on what's happening. Because if we don't have it in the back of our heads, chances are that when that communication comes that immediately gets us into that heightened emotional state, we're not going to remember that that's like a telltale sign that somebody is trying to defraud you.
Great points. Kim, is there anything you might want to add to that?
Yeah, so absolutely echoing what Kathy said, talking to each other, asking questions. But also, if you have the ability, if you're a little more tech savvy, or you've learned how to do something like put two-factor authentication on your account or set your privacy settings on social media, go to someone in your family or a neighbor or a friend who you may suspect is not that comfortable, and ask them if you can show them how to do it. Because what we've found with some of the participants in our program is most of them don't know how to set their privacy settings on social media. They don't know how to put two-factor authentication on their accounts. They're not familiar with using good passwords or not reusing passwords. And they're not familiar with phishing emails. And so those basic 4 things, if you know how to do that, check in with those in your family who may not. Help them, help your neighbor. The only way we can really stop this is education. And if we know something, we need to share it. And if you don't know how to do some of those things yourself, check out our websites, check out fightcybercrime.org, and you can follow the step-by-step instructions for those four things.
Thanks so much.
Sam, I'd like to add, one other thing that may not come to mind for everyone right away is adding, particularly in brokerage or investment accounts, you can add a trusted contact. And that is someone that your firm can reach out to if they can't reach you for an extended time period. So they're not going to do it every time you don't answer your phone, but let's say they've been unable to reach you and they need to talk to you about something in your account, or perhaps they suspect some financial exploitation is taking place. They can reach out to the trusted contact to get a little bit more information. And they can also place a pause on transactions, particularly related to securities transactions, so investment accounts, while an investigation is taking place. And while some individuals may say, well, that's, it's my money, I want to do with it what I want, we do find that, once the money's out of the account, it's not coming back. And so when the firms, whether it's an investment firm or let's say the banking sector, to the extent that these laws start to come in or rules start to come into play, you can help protect individuals, but the individual has to take that step to designate the trusted contact, to know that these situations happen and that the financial institutions want to help them too. So pay attention to your accounts, read your statements. That's actually a really important thing. Maybe it's not a scam situation where romance scam where you were actively, knowledgeably passing funds to someone deceptively, for a deceptive purpose. But there are other scams where someone may obtain access to your account. So paying attention to your credit card statements, your bank account statements, your investment statements is really an important flag.
Christine, that's actually an excellent point, particularly bearing in mind that oftentimes a trusted contact could be a financial caregiver of someone, particularly an informal financial caregiver. So for many of the caregivers who are on the line, what would you say are some of the warning signs of financial exploitation or financial scams that they should look out for?
A change in spending habits for an individual. So let's say, I know I work with a group who sometimes flags like the home shopping networks as as an indication that something different could be going on, not because they're not good places to shop, but if someone is changing the way they spend and how they spend, it can also be a change in other aspects of their life. So a change in their spending habits, maybe it's their withdrawal rates, the amounts, the sums, the frequency, but also secrecy about maybe a new friend, secrecy about someone that they've met potentially online only, who is now a very close friend. So secrecy and change in spending habits would be two things, but I'm sure my other colleagues here have more to offer.
Kathy, anything to add?
Yeah, you might also notice things like if you go to that loved one's home and there are a bunch of bills that haven't even been opened yet, that might be a sign that they're not paying their bills because they can't, because they are sending their money somewhere else. And I think what Christine says, I just want to double down on. If there's a change in typical behavior and they're becoming much more secretive or unwilling to really talk much about anything or anything that's going on in their personal life, that is a huge red flag.
Kim?
Also, gift card receipts. If you find a lot of gift card receipts, they're purchasing gift cards in bulk. That's a huge sign. And also, you know, just to go that next step, when you do see these activities, meeting them where they are rather than saying, you know, you're being scammed. You know, because again, think about the fact that they've been communicating with this scammer for some time and have some level of confidence in that person. So you can't just come right out and say, you're being scammed, knock it off, and get angry with them when they don't listen. You need to meet them where they are and say, okay, let's take this one step at a time. So how did you meet this person? Or how long have you been talking to them? Hey, let's try doing this and see if they still communicate with you. Let's just check it out. You know, go meet them where they are. Don't come down on them so hard.
Kathy, I think you had also highlighted this a little bit earlier, but I think I want to build off of it right now, particularly just with Kim's comments. You know, I often hear from bankers, for instance, when they're noticing issues of financial exploitation and they've got challenges sort of convincing an individual, an older adult, that they're actually being scammed, kind of referencing some of the things that Kim just mentioned. But do you have specific tips that anybody could use to really help convince the older adult that they're actually being scammed when it happens, given these circumstances?
Yeah, and it's one of the most difficult things that people face, because when you're in that heightened emotional state, in that ether, and in a relationship that you believe is a relationship, it is really, really hard to come out of that and understand this person has been groomed, socially engineered, targeted specifically. And so, like Kim said, when you're the adult daughter and you come in and realize that mom's involved with a scam, understand what happened. She's a victim of a crime, and talk to her, lean in on the empathy, lean in on the, I'm so sorry, Mom, but I have to tell you, I'm pretty sure this is a scam. Let's talk it through. And, you know, that doesn't always work either. Sometimes what works is getting third-party information in front of them. So if mom is involved in a romance scam and you go to the AARP.org Fraud Watch Network website, you go to our resource center and you see romance scams, print it out, put it in front of her. Go to the Federal Trade Commission, print what they have out. Go to Kim's website, just anywhere that you can find it and say, look, here are all the sort of proof points that this person is not being honest with you. And sometimes it's even bringing in an authority figure to that person. You know, if she has a broker dealer that she's been working with forever, that person could get through to her. A police officer could sit down and explain that this is a really common type of crime and that she's, you know, and this is what she's experiencing. Just trust that they don't understand it and it's no fault of their own. You just have to treat it really delicately and with great empathy so that they can maintain their dignity and a sense of self-respect.
And Kathy, that is just so important, the empathy, and what I speak with people about as well is if you want to be there to protect them in the future, you need to maintain that relationship, and you maintain that relationship much more strongly with empathy and care and concern than with judgment and, accusation. And so while you couldn't have protected them necessarily, or maybe you could have, but while you may have not protected someone in one instance, it doesn't mean there's not another opportunity. And in order to be there in the future and have them trust you and come to you as a person to come to next time, then you need to maintain that relationship.
And Sam, if I can just jump in on two different pieces. One is also sharing victim stories. There are lots of them, I'm sure, on all of our websites and online. Sometimes hearing the other victim stories and the similarities might, wake someone up to what's happening. But I know you asked about financial institutions, and one of the things that we learned in our peer support program from the participants was when they were asked by a bank employee or financial institution if they were sure that this wasn't a scam or if they knew this person, their response was, of course I know this person, because they do know this person. They're in a relationship, this is their life partner, or this is someone who has gained their confidence in some way. So asking if they know the person is probably not the best question, because they do know the person. And so maybe asking a couple of follow-up questions after that, if you really suspect that the person is being scammed, would be helpful.
Great points, absolutely great points. So I think we talked a little bit about, financial organizations, financial institutions. Obviously, law enforcement and as well as adult protective services are, key professionals that should be and are involved in protecting older adults. But Christine, would you say that there are any other groups or organizations that are involved or should be involved or that we should partner with in terms of protecting our older adults?
When it comes down to the community level, there are so many opportunities to engage other organizations and other fraud fighters in the community in protecting older adults. So you may not think about, Kathy and I engaged in some research some years ago, our organizations, and one of the suggestions was, hairdressers. Where do people share their stories? Who do they form relationships with? These are the people that may be able to identify red flags before anybody else. So to the extent that you can build strong coalitions or elder care support networks in your community with a variety of organizations, whether it's community centers, particularly those that serve older adults, libraries, public librarians and library staff, individuals that are outside of the financial sector, but who may be really that first person to hear about what's going on in someone else's life. When those individuals know where to go, they may say, oh, wow, I've heard about this kind of scam. Maybe you're getting your hair done. I've heard about this. I heard that the Federal Trade Commission has this video about that. Why don't you look that up? Or AARP has a watchdog alert on this very topic, or in the bulletin this month. So engaging all these different types of organizations and Better Business Bureaus as well. They're in communities around the country, and they're also very engaged in the scam and fraud prevention front. And so encouraging law enforcement to connect with Better Business Bureaus, AARP offices, FINRA offices, all sorts of employers, getting coalitions of employers to have these conversations. I think we all have a role to play. And so it's important that we be inclusive and not exclusive in who we think about can help fight fraud.
Well said, very well said. Kathy or Kim, anything else to add?
Yeah, we kind of brushed across law enforcement. I want to spend a minute or two on that particular subject. What we've learned, and Christine and Kim have seen this too, I'm sure, is when we talk to a person who has experienced fraud, they've experienced a crime. It is a financial crime. Yet, when our suggestion is go and report it to your local police, there's like typically two responses. And one is, especially with a romance scam, well, that's not a crime. You gave him your money. or it's a civil matter, it's not a crime. Well, guess what? It is a crime. And I think we've sort of fallen off looking at it that way because historically, law enforcement, FBI have not been sufficiently engaged and involved in this crime. And it is now at an epidemic level. So we need all law enforcement to understand that, yes, this is a crime and you should at the very least take a report. And we want the FBI to work these cases. And even if it's only one $10,000 loss in your region, it doesn't mean that's the only crime related to that. You know, you need a bigger scope. You need to understand that these are enterprise crimes. These are transnational criminal enterprises, just like drug traffickers, just like gun traffickers. We've got to go after it that way.
Absolutely. So you sort of started talking about the reporting a little bit right over there. Kim, could you talk a little bit about where people can report frauds impacting older adults?
Sure. So there's a multitude of places they can report. We always ask if they've gone to their local police department. That's always a good place to start. The FBI IC3 is definitely where we direct people. You can assist somebody with filling out that IC3 form online. If they're having difficulty doing it, you can help submit it for them. Focusing on the who, what, when, where, why. It can be overwhelming because it asks for a lot of information, but understand that if an investigation is open, they will always come and ask you for some of that documentation. You can also go to your local attorney general's office. All attorney general's offices have an office of consumer protection. In addition to that, they have an elder abuse and fraud unit. Go there, talk to someone there, talk to the victim advocate there. Also, another avenue you can do is the Federal Trade Commission. You can also go to the local Secret Service field office and file a report there. So if you're up to it, file in as many places as you possibly can. But that can be difficult as well. So if you have to choose just one, I would suggest the FBI IC3 so that that report at least gets there.
Christine, any thoughts on this?
I'll let Kathy address the AARP angles, but I know that the Better Business Bureaus, I mentioned them, the Scam Tracker database, you can report to Better Business Bureaus, and they will then route that information to the Federal Trade Commission as well. So I would encourage you to look to tools like that. If it's something related to investments, financial accounts along those lines, absolutely contact FINRA. You can use our website, FINRA, FINRA.org, FINRA.org, or the Securities and Exchange Commission. They also take reports at investor.gov. And every state, Kim mentioned the Attorney General, also has a state securities regulator. And we work in concert with the state securities regulators and the SEC. So when it comes to investing, you probably want to report to all three of us, FINRA, SEC, and the state securities regulator. All of us take reports and are happy to try and help consumers through this process.
Kathy, any thoughts?
So I had mentioned AARP's Fraud Watch Network helpline. That number is 877-908-3360. And you can call that number to report fraud. And the report goes into the Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Sentinel data. And our fraud volunteers that are on the helpline can help you with other things. I think the single most important thing from a personal perspective, in the off chance that some bad guy's going to get caught, or in the chance that down the road there may be a victim restitution fund in your state, you should file a police report. And if they say it's not a crime, say, I'm a victim of a financial crime and I insist. At least get that. And the other ones are really important, but just think about that. Are you going to report to 17 different organizations in 17 different ways? I think that's one of the problems we have. We have so many places to report and we don't get feedback from them. The data go in, and it's really important to report because that data are used to, put the, connect the dots. So that's needed, but you're not getting information back, and it becomes a little overwhelming. At the very least, the police and the Federal Trade Commission.
But I want to, recognizing that reporting is obviously incredibly important and key to getting things done and addressing these issues. I do want to step back a little bit and go back to another thought about this, bearing in mind, the emotional aspects that you've all kind of talked to. There's a shame aspect here, right? That's key. Nobody wants to admit that they were scammed. There's massive embarrassment. There's a whole host of different types of emotions that are going on through this process. Kathy, could you talk about, what do we do in this types of scenarios? Is there any advice on how to address this, improve this, change this, or what we could do to help?
So Christine's office and mine are getting ready to put out a paper about blame and shame in the context of fraud victimization. We wanted to really go deep and try to understand, like, we have the sense that when we use words like scammed, tricked, duped, bilked, that we're essentially saying the victim is somehow responsible for being a victim. They didn't know something, they didn't do something, they're older, maybe they have cognitive impairment, and so we kind of give it a pass. We look deep with a consultancy called Heart and Mind Strategies to really go into our cultural norms, and we did identify that the words that we use do make it seem like we're blaming the victim, even though the sentiment might not match, but we're just so used to using those words. And I don't know if it's chicken or the egg, but we blame you, victim, and victim blames herself. She's humiliated. She can't believe this happened. If I tell my family, they're going to think that I can't take care of myself. So all of these things occur, and what we submit is we've got to change the cultural narrative on fraud victimization. These people aren't, they're not idiots. They're not stupid. And those are the words that we use. These are intentionally targeted victims. And we need to treat it that way. And we need to watch our language and lead with empathy and not with, I can't believe you fell for that.
Before we switch over to some questions from the audience, Christine, do you want to speak to that as well?
I just add that, every individual responds a little bit differently to what has happened and their victim experience. And I remember in particular a couple I've worked with for many years who lost money to an investment scam. And, for the wife, it empowered her to speak her truth and come forward and be a fraud fighter. And she spoke before the Senate Committee on Aging, and she really went after what had happened. And, fortunately for them, the scammer had been caught, and this was a particular investment fraud Ponzi scheme operator, and he was in prison. But it wasn't enough to know that he was in prison. She really wanted to tell the story. But the husband, on the other hand, became a complete recluse, right? He didn't want to tell anybody. He blamed himself, as Kathy was talking. So it's really important that we also recognize that we need to use a little bit of our own, emotional intelligence when we're working with individuals and asking them questions, because everybody is going to respond a little bit differently. And that empathy and even just time, it can take time to get the story out of someone and build their trust enough that they want to share with you. And so just be sensitive that there's really not a one size fits all, but to the extent that we take the blame away that they may be feeling of on their own and help them direct that to the fraudster, you're going to get a lot further in supporting them.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Kim, any final thoughts?
Yeah, and I think, anyone who has experienced a cybercrime is thinking to themselves, how did I do this? I'm smarter than this. How did I not see this coming? I mean, this is normal. This is the way any of us would be reacting. And so the important thing to note is that these are professional criminals, extremely good at what they do. I hate to use the word good, but you're right. They're organized crime groups. They know what they're doing. They're using mind manipulation. And it can happen to anyone at any time can click on a phishing email by accident, can fall for a text scam, can talk to someone online and believe that they're communicating with one person and they're communicating with another. So it can happen to anyone at any time. And really the education for everyone is that these are professional criminals and we need to educate ourselves and be supportive of each other so that we don't blame the person because we're already feeling bad enough when something like that happens to us.
Well, thank you so much. So it is about 12:51 Eastern time at this point, so I'd like to turn it back over to Amy. I know we've got a couple of people on the line, actually quite a few people on the line. I'd like to take a couple minutes to review some of the questions from the audience. Amy, could you help out with that?
Oh, sure, happy to, and thanks for the opportunity. There's a question that has come up many times from multiple attendees, and the crux of it is this. If we know that our customer, who's an older adult, is involved in a scam, and we have tried really hard to convince that person that they're a victim of a scam, this is financial fraud, and they refuse to believe us, what can we do? Aside from reporting it on their behalf to IC3 or some of the other places, is there anything else that we can do to not allow transactions to go forward that we know are a scam, whether that's someone that's in a romance scam overseas or that's a family member who's taking advantage of that person? I know that's a really tricky one to cover. Kathy, I'm going to throw that one to you first and then welcome the comments of anyone else who'd like to chime in. Kathy, any thoughts about what can be done in that scenario?
Well, I actually think that the best people to respond to that is Sam on behalf of bankers and Christine on behalf of broker-dealers.
Sam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think, the challenge with all of this is that you gotta continue to ask several questions. I think that we had sort of referenced this a couple of different times. Oftentimes when we're looking at this and there's a situation where, let's say you're a financial institution, whether you're a credit union, broker dealer, or a bank, and you see this is going on, you may be tempted just to get extremely frustrated and ask one or two questions. But I think a key piece of this is going to be persistence. It's going to be persistently asking some of those additional questions about understanding what is going on, what is this relationship, and trying to get to the root of the issue here. But also beyond that, I think what's also key is trying to get the older adult to pause, because these are oftentimes high pressure situations and scenarios, right? A scammer is going to try to say that there's something immediately that an older adult has to do. And so if we can put a situation where we can stall a little bit and get the older adult to take a few moments just to think about this, there's a lot of greater opportunities to put an end to these types of situations. In addition to that, I'll also share that there is within the broker-dealer space, as Christine had mentioned, but also within banks, they're starting to do more work around the trusted contact piece, right? And that's also an essential piece here. If you can identify other members of, whether they're relatives, family members, friends that are involved, particularly as you have relationships forming with your customer and you see who else they engage with, reaching out to them can also help solidify the points that you are trying to make.
And I'll add, I'd already mentioned the rules. So, broker dealers can have safe harbor to pause transactions to the extent that they have reported it. And so they report to Adult Protective Services, report in a number of ways. And so there is that opportunity. Training is so important. And while there's a lot of different nuances to this, I'll put a plug in for AARP has a wonderful training called Bank Safe. And to the extent that institutions are, and it's free, so you could sign up as an institution, developing escalation policies, just having training so that any individual in your institution knows where to turn. They don't need to know how to build the engine. They just need to know who's working on the engine, right? And so who at the organization do you escalate to when you have these issues, and how does that individual help you?
Thank you all for that wealth of information. And I can say, wow, there are lots of questions coming in. I'm going to see if we have maybe a chance for one more. Oh, this is a good one. Do banks have safe harbor? So that just came in from an attendee. Christine, you were just talking about safe harbor. Do you know if those rules apply to banks as well?
Well, I could actually speak to some of that if that's okay, Christine. So within the banking space, there's specific laws that take place on a state level that would govern a lot of these types of scenarios. So that's what my major recommendation would be, to look into the State Bankers Association and look into the state specific laws that govern a lot of this. But there are some federal guidances around appropriately reporting. So there is a guidance from 2013 in which 8 federal interagency guidance provided some information on what financial institutions can and cannot do, essentially encouraging reporting with law enforcement. But there's also updated information that was actually passed in 2018. It was part of the Senior Safe Act, which provided a safe harbor in which financial institutions, banks have the ability to share and communicate and collaborate with adult protective services, as well as law enforcement and others that are relevant, should a couple of specific situations be covered. And those are largely having to do with training, understanding customer privacy laws, and things of that nature.
I know it seems like a blizzard of resources have been shared during today's session. Wow, so much of this will be stored on the website where we're going to archive the recording for today, so folks can go back and digest at their own leisure. And Sam, we're going to turn things back over to you for a final wrap as we're getting close to our time here together. So Sam, back to you for final thoughts.
I appreciate it, Amy. So, since we've got everybody on the line right here, I think it'd be a good idea for the panel just to share one final comment, additional thought. And this time around, I'll start with Kim.
Thanks. I would say if you can do one thing, and that's help someone in your family, your neighbor, your friend, to help them secure their accounts, their privacy settings on social media. Ask the question if they need any help. Because if we can all do that and help 1 or 2 people, we could make a huge difference. And to those of you who may be experiencing a cybercrime or have experienced a cybercrime, understand that you're not alone, that there are resources out there. Visit any of our websites to find those resources, and know that you're not alone, and this can happen to anyone, and these are professional criminals, and it's not your fault.
Kathy?
I'll echo with Kim. A lot of fraud is happening online, social media, but also phishing. So what you can do to help people, protect themselves in that way is really important. But the other really, really big vector here is the telephone. Robocalls, despite laws and regulations to tamp down on them, are still out of control. And so many of them are illegal calls. And I know you're going to shake your head, but I'm telling you now, put your number and everybody in your family's number on the do not call registry at donotcall.gov. You don't think it works because you did it 5 years ago and you keep getting robocalls. Well, the number you put on there used to expire and it doesn't anymore. And will that stop the scammers? Absolutely not. But it will stop legitimate telemarketing companies from calling you, because they'll get a fat fine from the FCC, which makes the calls coming in more obvious scams. Don't answer those calls. Let them go to your answering machine. Let them go to voicemail. If you have to create a refusal script just to remind yourself, I'm sorry, I don't do business on the phone, hang up. Don't pick up to begin with if you can, but if you do, find a way out quickly.
And Christine.
I have 2 quick thoughts. One is we all have a role to play. So no matter what position you're in coming to this, whether you're a consumer who's listening to this, whether you're a business professional, financial professional, or in the community services group, we all have a role to play. Identify those areas where you could make a difference. Maybe it's putting out consumer education material in the lobby of your building. Maybe it's you have a blog and you want to talk about financial topics and you interview people like Kathy along the way. See what roles you can play to elevate the conversation. And no matter what, recognize that we all have our vulnerabilities. And one simple thing that you can do is bouncing ideas off of others. Don't just take what you hear for truth or take what you see for truth in terms of like a scammer online. Go to a third party outside of the transaction and say, hey, how does this sound to you? One, because you can benefit from their collective knowledge, but two, because just voicing it often helps you see the flags yourself.
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been absolutely excellent. I appreciate all of your participation and sharing some great information. I know I'll be taking some of this back, and I hope everyone on the line will as well, and use this to spread the word to help protect America's elders. So at this point, Amy, I'll turn it right back to you.
Thank you all. Oh my goodness, what a ton of information you all share with everyone. Appreciate everyone who made time and space for today. This session will be uploaded to the website in the next day or two, and we continue this series on elder justice in June, looking at fraud that particularly focuses on healthcare issues. So that series will be 4 Wednesdays starting on June 8th. So look for more information about that. However you heard about this series, you'll hear about that next series in the same way. Thanks again to sponsors of this series, the ABA Foundation, the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, AARP, and the National Capital Region Chapter of InfoCard. Hope that all of you stay safe and avoid all financial fraud from here on out forever. And we'll look forward to the next time that we see you online together. And thanks so much, everybody, for your time and your energy today. Stay safe, y'all.